David was a man known in the region for his dog breeding. He had a reputation for being rigid, demanding, and without much patience for anything that didn't meet his expectations. It wasn't difficult to see that, for him, dogs were not companions or beings with feelings, but just tools for his business. And it was with that same cold look that he looked at Bella, his dog, and the puppies she had just given birth to. Bella was a strong and loyal dog with eyes that always sought to please. Her cubs were small, fragile, and still depended on their mother's milk to survive. But for David, those puppies were useless. Unlike what he expected, they did not show the aggression or instinct that he considered valuable in the dogs he raised, and so, in his mind, they were nothing more than a burden. That morning, David decided that he would not spend any more resources on Bella and her little ones. With the same nonchalance with which he would close a deal, he placed Bella and the puppies in the back of his old pickup truck and drove down a long dirt road surrounded by tall, dense trees. He didn't say a word, and Bella, innocently, continued to look at him with hope, not understanding what was coming. When he reached an isolated clearing in the middle of the forest, David stopped the car. With firm steps, he descended, pulling Bella by the leash while the puppies, still disoriented, stumbled to keep up. He didn't look back. With a quick and secure knot, he tied Bella to the trunk of a large tree while she watched him in silence, still believing that he had a good purpose for being there. "You're worthless," he said, his voice dry and devoid of any emotion. "You are of no use to me." Then, without looking back, he walked back to the truck. Bella stood still, her eyes confused, still waiting for him to return. She wagged her tail once or twice, believing that it was only temporary, that her owner would return with water, food, or a new order. But the truck disappeared in the distance, and the sound of the engine was swallowed by the silence of the forest. David didn't look in the rearview mirror. For him, that was just a problem solved. As night fell, Bella began to understand that something was wrong. The cold of the darkness took over, and the puppies, fragile and hungry, began to cry. The forest, with its mysterious and ominous sounds, seemed more alive than ever. Bella, even though she was scared, gathered her strength to keep the puppies close, using her own body to protect them. She didn't know what was coming, but she felt like she needed to fight, because now only she stood between her little ones and the cruel world that surrounded them. David, on the other hand, drove home without remorse. For him, Bella and the puppies no longer existed. His cold and merciless decision reflected the lack of compassion he carried in his heart. He would never have imagined that that cowardly act would begin a story of strength, struggle, and overcoming, which would show that true courage and loyalty are not born from abandonment, but from love and the instinct to protect. As the hours passed, Bella began to realize that David wasn't coming back. The noise of the forest, previously distant and muffled, seemed closer. Branches breaking in the distance, the whistle of the wind through the trees, and other sounds she didn't recognize began to make her heart beat faster. Still, she couldn't afford to weaken. Her cubs needed her. Even though she was hungry and tired, she kept them close, licking them gently, trying to calm them down. The hunger began to hurt more, not only for Bella, but also for her cubs. Their fragile little bodies cried softly, seeking the warmth and milk that she no longer had the strength to produce. Bella felt despair growing inside her, but she remained firm. She couldn't give in to fear. I needed to resist. When the first ray of sunlight finally cut through the darkness of the forest, Bella felt a slight relief. Dawn seemed to bring a promise of hope, but that feeling didn't last long. When she turned to check on her cubs, she realized something was wrong. 4 of them lay still, their small bodies unresponsive to Bella's gentle touch. She tried to wake them up with her nose, licking them gently, but there was no response. They had succumbed to the cold and hunger of the night. Bella's heart broke. She felt a pain she had never felt before, as if something inside her was being ripped away. But even in the midst of grief, Bella knew she couldn't give in to despair. She still had live cubs that needed her. Weak, exhausted, and hungry, she struggled to her feet, gathered the remaining cubs close to her, and decided that she would fight for them. I didn't know how, but I would do whatever was necessary to protect them. That morning marked the beginning of a fight for survival. Bella, who had previously known only the security of a home life, now faced an unfamiliar and cruel world. But inside her, something began to change. A mother's instinct turned into a silent strength, and even in the face of all the pain, Bella found the determination to move forward. The morning progressed slowly, and Bella fought to keep her puppies protected, even with her weak body and exhausted mind. The sun was already up, but the heat wasn't enough to alleviate the cold that seemed to have taken over his heart since the night before. She knew she couldn't go on like this for long. Hungry, thirsty, and without strength, the future seemed darker every moment. It was then that Bella heard something. At first, it was just the rustling of leaves, but soon the sound became clearer. Soft, cautious footsteps. She pricked her ears, her muscles tense. The smell that invaded his snout made his heart race. It was a wild smell, unlike anything she had ever smelled. Something inside her knew that smell represented danger. Among the shadows of the forest, shapes appeared. First one, then another, and another. Wolves. A whole flock began to appear, moving like silent shadows, their eyes shining in the faint light that cut through the trees. They were big, strong, and their presence made the forest seem even darker. Bella instinctively placed herself in front of the puppies, lowering her head and showing her teeth, a clear warning that she was ready to protect the little ones, even without having the strength. The wolves surrounded Bella and her cubs. His eyes, cold and calculating, assessed the situation. They were so close that Bella could hear their slow, controlled breathing. Fear pulsed in her chest, but she couldn't back down. Her weak body trembled, but her motherly instincts forced her to remain firm. It was then that the biggest of them, clearly the leader, stepped forward. He was immense, with scars that told stories of ancient battles. His golden eyes were intense, and Bella felt him studying her differently, almost as if he was trying to understand her situation. The world seemed to stop for a moment as the two stared at each other. Bella was prepared for the worst. If he attacked, she knew she wouldn't stand a chance, but something unexpected happened. The alpha tilted his head slightly, as if curious. He took a deep breath, taking in the scent of Bella and the puppies. His eyes, which had previously seemed threatening, softened for a brief moment. Then he made a low sound, almost like a short growl, but it didn't carry aggression. It was an order. The other wolves, who until then had been tense and ready to act, began to retreat. Bella stood still, not believing what was happening. The alpha took one more long look at her and her cubs before turning and disappearing into the trees. One by one, the other wolves followed, moving with the same deadly grace with which they had arrived. Within seconds, they completely disappeared, as if they had never been there. Bella was still shaking, but this time, it was with relief. She could hardly believe what had just happened. For some reason, the wolves had decided to spare her. Maybe it was the smell of her kits, or the protective look she gave them, but the danger was over, at least for now. Bella sighed deeply, releasing a breath she hadn't even realized she was holding. Her cubs, oblivious to the danger they had faced, began to move and whimper, looking for their mother. Bella licked them gently, trying to calm them down, while feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. She knew that meeting had been a warning. The forest was dangerous and new challenges could arise at every moment. But by some miracle, she and her little ones had been spared. The sun was already setting once again, and Bella felt her hunger tighten. Her puppies, still so small and fragile, whimpered softly, pressing themselves against her for warmth and comfort. Bella knew that if she stayed there, stuck in that tree, none of them would survive for long. Something inside her began to change. She realized that waiting was no longer an option. No one would come to help them. If he wanted to save his cubs, he would have to fight. Bella began to move, testing the limits of the collar that held her. The leather was thick and tough, but his teeth, despite his fatigue, were still strong. With determination, she began to chew. Each bite was an effort. Each pull seemed to steal what little energy she had left. But Bella didn't stop. She was thinking about her puppies, their little dependent bodies. That image gave her the strength to continue. Time seemed to drag on, but finally, with one last effort, the leather gave way. The collar broke, and Bella was free. She staggered for a moment, surprised that she could move again. But there was no time to rest. Her cubs needed food, and she needed to find something to feed them. With her senses alert, Bella began to explore the forest. At first, everything seemed impossible. Bella had never needed to hunt before. She was a dog raised by humans, used to receiving ready-made food without effort. Now, however, she felt something different. His instincts, previously dormant, began to awaken. The smell of the air, the sounds of the forest, even the movement of the leaves on the ground seemed more alive, clearer. Bella knew she would need to rely on these senses to survive. The first hunting attempts were clumsy. Bella tried to chase a squirrel, but it was too fast. She tried to approach a mouse, but it escaped before she could act. Each failure made the hunger hurt even more, but Bella didn't give up. She kept trying, moving more carefully, watching every sound and every movement around her. Finally, after hours of effort, Bella was successful. She found a young rabbit, distracted while feeding. This time, Bella moved patiently, crawling across the floor and approaching silently. When he was close enough, he jumped with all the strength he had. Her teeth closed on the rabbit, and for the first time, Bella caught her prey. The raw meat was unlike anything she had ever eaten. But at that moment, it didn't matter. It was food. It was survival. After eating enough to regain some energy, Bella returned to her cubs with the rest. They snuggled around her, suckling harder now that her body had the energy to produce milk again. But there was still more work to do. Bella knew she needed to find water. Her sense of smell guided her through the forest, following a faint scent of dampness to a crystal-clear stream. She drank deeply, feeling the coolness of the water revitalize her tired body. As she returned to the place where her cubs were resting, Bella noticed something. The forest, which had once seemed scary, was now beginning to feel like home. Yes, it was full of danger, but it also offered everything she needed to keep her little ones alive. In the days that followed, Bella established a new routine. During the day, she explored the forest in search of food and water, learning to identify the smells and sounds that led her to her prey. At night, she stayed with her cubs, protecting them from the cold and the threats of darkness. Every day, Bella became stronger, more confident. Her cubs, which had previously seemed so fragile, began to grow, fueled by their mother's strength and determination. Bella had transformed. She was no longer just an abandoned dog. Now she was a fighter, a protector, and above all, a survivor. But life in the forest was still full of surprises. One morning, while walking in search of water to quench her puppy's thirst, Bella smelled a different smell in the air. It was something strong, a smell she didn't yet know well, but it made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She followed the trail cautiously, moving slowly, her senses heightened. The smell grew stronger as she approached a cave partially hidden by vegetation. Bella hesitated for a moment. Instinct told her that there was danger there, but something stronger was pushing her forward. A low and faint sound came from inside the cave. They were small cries, sharp and helpless, that made Bella's heart sink. With careful steps, she entered the cave, the sunlight barely illuminating the dark interior, and there before her was the source of the smell and the sounds. On the cold floor, a wolf lay, motionless, clearly lifeless. Beside her, 3 little wolf cubs were whimpering, their eyes still closed, unable to understand what had happened. The wolf seemed to have fought to the end to protect them, but now she was there, unable to take care of her little ones. Bella stood still, watching the scene. She felt a wave of sadness and empathy at what she saw. Something inside her knew exactly what those puppies were facing. Abandonment, the fight for survival, the fear of the unknown. They were as vulnerable as their own cubs had been. For a moment, Bella considered retreating. She already had her own puppies to take care of. She already had a huge weight on her shoulders. But maternal instinct spoke louder. Without hesitating any longer, Bella slowly approached the wolf cubs. They were weak, but when they felt his presence, they tried to crawl towards the warmth of his body. Bella laid down next to them, allowing them to snuggle up next to her, mingling with her own puppies. She licked them gently as she did with her own, reassuring them and welcoming them as part of her family. The following days were of adaptation. The wolf cubs and Bella's cubs learned to live together. Despite their differences, they quickly bonded, forming a unique litter. Bella, in turn, divided her attention equally between everyone. She fed them, protected them, and guided them through the forest. It was a challenge greater than any she had faced, but Bella seemed to find strength she didn't even know she had. The wolf cubs were more agile and had sharper wild instincts, while Bella's were more docile and attentive to her guidance. Together, they began to explore the world around them, learning from each other. Bella watched them with pride. His new family was an unlikely mix, but increasingly stronger and more united. The cave where he found the cubs became a safe haven for everyone. There, they took shelter from the cold and the dangers of the forest. Bella, who once feared for her cubs' survival, now saw hope. She knew that raising them in that environment would be difficult, but she also knew that they were growing stronger every day. As she watched the puppies playing together, Bella realized that her mission had become even greater. It didn't matter whether they were wolves or dogs. To her, they were all hers. They needed her, and she would fight with all her might to ensure they had a chance to live. In that moment, Bella understood that her strength came not just from her desire to survive, but from the deep and unwavering love she felt for her family. The days passed, and Bella's little family grew in strength and togetherness. Each cub, whether dog or wolf, showed its own personality and abilities. The wolf pups were fast, with attentive ears and sharp instincts, while Bella's pups were more confident and attentive to their mother's guidance. Despite the differences, everyone mixed together as if they were one. Bella knew time was precious. She needed to prepare the cubs for the challenges of life in the forest, because, despite protecting them with all her strength, she knew that they would need to learn to take care of themselves. Then, day by day, he began to train them. The first lesson was to teach how to recognize dangers. Bella took the puppies for short walks around the cave, always on alert. When she heard the sound of a twig breaking or a strange movement in the shadows, she would immediately stop, ears pricked, showing her cubs how to identify a possible threat. They learned quickly, imitating their mother and paying attention to every sign. Soon, even the youngest ones knew how to crouch down and remain silent when something strange appeared. Then came the hunt. Bella knew this was a crucial skill for survival. At first, the cubs just watched as she hunted small animals. They followed her carefully, paying attention to her movements, learning how to silently approach prey and the right moment to attack. The wolf pups seemed to catch on quickly, but Bella's pups weren't far behind. They made up for their lack of instinct with a determination to please their mother. One of the most important lessons Bella taught was teamwork. She made them work together, sharing tasks. Some distracted their prey while others positioned themselves to attack. With each success, Bella showed her pride by licking them or wagging her tail, making it clear that they were on the right path. But it wasn't just survival that brought the cubs together. They also played and explored together. They ran through the forest, climbed fallen logs, and played at hunting each other. In these games, the differences between dogs and wolves disappeared. They treated each other like brothers, learning from each other and strengthening their bonds. Bella watched everything with a mixture of pride and relief. Despite all the challenges, their family was growing together and strong. The cave, once just a makeshift shelter, became a real home. At night, everyone huddled together to sleep, sharing warmth and security. When the cold forest wind howled outside, Bella felt a quiet satisfaction. She had transformed that wild environment into a refuge for her family. Over time, the cubs began to venture out alone for short periods. They returned with exciting stories, bringing small trophies like twigs or feathers. Bella knew this was the next step towards their independence, but she still watched them closely, ready to intervene if anything got out of hand. It was a cold, silent morning in the forest. Fog crept across the ground, hiding part of the trees and creating a sense of unrest in the air. Bella, always alert, had left early in search of food for her family. The cubs, now bigger and stronger, stayed in the cave, resting and playing. But there was something strange about that morning, something Bella still couldn't identify. As she walked away through the forest, a strong, unfamiliar smell reached her nose. It was a different smell than she was used to, something that made every muscle in her body tense. It wasn't just the smell of another animal. It was the smell of danger. Her heart raced and she turned immediately, running back to the cave. On the way, the sounds began, cracking branches, quick, muffled footsteps. Bella knew what that meant. A strange pack had invaded the area. They were wolves, but different from the ones she had encountered before. These were fierce, without curiosity or hesitation. They were there to hunt. When Bella arrived at the cave, chaos had already begun. The cubs were huddled at the bottom, trying to protect themselves, while the invading wolves surrounded the entrance. The bright eyes and exposed teeth of the invaders showed that they would show no mercy. Bella growled with all her might, placing herself between the pups and the wolves. She was ready to fight until her last breath, but she knew she was at a huge disadvantage. Then something unexpected happened. The wolf cubs, now young and stronger, came out of the shadow of the cave. With wild instincts awakened and uncommon courage, they stood by Bella's side, defying the invading wolves. His canine brothers, inspired by his bravery, also began to move around, emitting small growls and barks. It was an unlikely scene. Wolf cubs and dogs, united as one family, facing a much greater enemy. The invaders attacked and the fighting was fierce. Bella and her cubs fought with everything they had, but the wolves were bigger, more experienced, and in greater numbers. With each blow, Bella felt her strength diminish. Despite his family's courage, the enemy seemed unbeatable. The cubs showed bravery, confusing the larger wolves with quick movements and coordinated attacks, but they were getting tired. Just when everything seemed lost, a sound cut through the air. A deep and powerful howl echoed through the forest, making everyone stop for a moment. Bella recognized that sound immediately. It was the alpha who had spared her months ago. From within the fog, he emerged with his pack, moving like swift, deadly shadows. The invading wolves, taken by surprise, hesitated. The alpha wasted no time. He led the attack with precision and strength, his pack following close behind. In just a few moments, the tide of the battle changed. The invading wolves, realizing they were at a disadvantage, began to retreat. Their leader let out a short howl, calling his people to retreat, and one by one they disappeared into the forest. When silence finally returned, Bella fell to her knees, exhausted. Her cubs, panting and covered in dirt, gathered around her. They were injured but alive. The alpha approached Bella with firm steps, but his expression was not threatening. He touched his nose to hers in a gesture that seemed to say, "We're here to help." Then, with one last look, he led his pack back into the forest. Bella watched as they disappeared, feeling a mixture of relief and gratitude. The forest was still dangerous, but that day she saw that it wasn't all hostility. There were unexpected allies, even among the wild. And most importantly, he saw that his family, however unlikely, was stronger than any obstacle. Bella knew they would still face many challenges, but together they were prepared for anything. The battlefield that was once pure confusion was now silent. The invading wolves, who seemed so threatening and unbeatable, had disappeared into the forest, defeated and humiliated. The arrival of the alpha and his pack had changed everything. Not only did they save Bella and her cubs, but they also showed that even in the wild, alliances could be formed in times of need. Bella, still panting, looked around. Her cubs were dirty, tired, but alive. That was all that mattered. She lowered her head for a moment, trying to catch her breath and process what had just happened. The strength of their cubs, the courage of the young wolves, and above all, the unexpected help of the alpha had been enough to survive. The big alpha approached Bella. He walked with a calm confidence, his muscular body covered in scars that told stories of battles past. His golden eyes, so intense and expressive, locked onto Bella's. There was no threat in his gaze, just a respectful calm. He stopped just a few steps away from her, and in that instant it seemed like the entire forest had held its breath. Bella raised her head, still wary but showing no fear. She knew that that wolf had the power to destroy her family, but he had chosen otherwise. When he touched his nose to hers, it was a simple gesture but full of meaning. It was as if he said, "I see you. I recognize your strength and your determination." At that moment, Bella felt something she had never imagined. Mutual respect, coming from a wild and powerful creature. The alpha then let out a short but loud howl. It was like a statement to his pack, who were still positioned in the shadows of the forest. With fluid movements, the wolves began to retreat, returning to the territory they had come from. Some of them looked at Bella and her family as they passed by, curious and perhaps even admiring. The alpha was the last to leave, but before disappearing into the trees, he gave Bella one last look, as if to say, "If you need us, we'll be here." When everything finally returned to silence, Bella felt a mixture of relief and pride. His family had survived something that seemed impossible. Their pups, both dogs and wolves, were learning to be more than survivors. They were learning to be a team, a real family. And now, in this unforgiving forest, they knew they were not completely alone. The alpha's gesture was more than a simple touch or a look. It was a silent promise that despite differences, there was understanding. These were not just alliances out of necessity, but a recognition of the strength and courage that Bella had demonstrated. She had become more than a mother or a leader to her cubs. Now, she was a respected figure even among the forest's most feared predators. Bella lifted her head, looking at the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, turning the sky orange and gold. The battle was over, but the journey continued. With her puppies around her and renewed determination in her heart, Bella knew that no matter what came, they would be ready to face it together. And somewhere in that wild expanse, she knew she had allies who respected her as much as she respected them. Days passed and the forest remained the same, wild, unpredictable, full of challenges and dangers. But something was different now. Bella and her pups, a unique mix of dogs and wolves, were no longer just isolated survivors. They were a family, united not by blood, but by the bond they formed through hardship and the strength they found in each other. Each puppy grew visibly, developing its own skills. The young wolves showed incredible agility and wild instincts, while Bella's pups maintained unwavering loyalty and a constant desire to learn. Together, they formed a combination that no predator would underestimate. Bella's daily training prepared them for whatever the future brought. She taught them to hunt, to hide when necessary, and above all, to work as a team. The cave that was once a simple shelter now felt like a real home. At night, the cubs would snuggle around Bella, warming each other as the sounds of the forest echoed outside. It was a peaceful time, but Bella knew she needed to remain vigilant. The forest never rested, and new dangers could arise at any time. Still, there was something that gave Bella greater security than she had ever had. The alliance with the pack of the Alpha that saved them was silent but firm. Every now and then she would spot one or another member of the pack in the distance, watching but never invading her space. It was as if they were always nearby, ready to help if needed. Knowing this gave Bella a relief she rarely allowed herself to feel. One morning, as the puppies played near the stream, Bella watched intently. They ran, jumped, and playfully fought, a mix of brute strength and youthful mischief. It was impossible not to feel proud. Against all odds, they not only survived, but were thriving. Every step, every day, was proof that their union was stronger than any challenge. Bella lifted her head, the cold wind brushing past her face, bringing with it the familiar scent of the forest. She knew the journey was far from over. There would be new challenges, new struggles, maybe even losses, but none of that made her afraid. Her strength came not only from her maternal instinct, but from the resilience that her unique family had built. Now she wasn't just a leader, she was a mother, a protector, and the heart of a family that, despite its differences, was indivisible. Wolves and dogs, creatures from such different worlds, found a way to live and grow together. And as long as they stuck together, Bella knew they could face anything. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with warm shades of orange and gold, Bella gathered her kits around her. With a firm gaze and a heart full of determination, she led them back to the cave. The forest kept calling them to challenges and adventures, but as always, they would go together, ready for whatever came. Because in the end, their strength wasn't just in their bodies, but in the unbreakable bond they had with each other. They were a family, a unique and resilient family, ready to flourish even in the most difficult terrain. And so ends the incredible journey of Bella and her unique family, a story of courage, resilience, and love that shows us how, even in the most difficult situations, unity and determination can overcome any obstacle. If this story touched your heart and inspired you in any way, leave a comment below and share what impacted you most. Don't forget to like to support our work, and of course, subscribe to the channel to follow more exciting stories like this. Activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Your interaction is what motivates us to continue bringing content that makes a difference. Until next time.